Thank you. Good evening and welcome to Policy Exchange. This building is normally unbearably hot, and luckily all the heating failed today, so we're generating our own heat and light. I hope that most of you seem to have some coats. You may need it, but I think it'll warm up pretty quickly. Welcome to this very important event. Last week we had Matt Ridley talking to us, and he said that the exchange, he played on our name, Policy Exchange. He developed his theory in his book, The Rational Optimist, that it's exchange, which is the great human characteristic of human progress, the exchange of ideas and practice, which is what makes us constantly adapt and succeed and deal with problems. And the more of that exchange that we can have with what's happened in policing in the United States, and its exchange over here, the better. And in fact, our guest tonight, William Bratton, is actually the possessor of a CBE. I think we have to call it an honorary CBE, if you're not a British citizen, which sadly for us he isn't, because of the exchange of best practice from the United States to Britain and with Britain. Policy Exchange has, for several years now, tried to develop ideas of police accountability. We've had a lot of influence, I think, on current government thinking. So the minister who's present tonight may immediately deny that. He doesn't count. Most people in Britain think they know a lot about American policing because they watch things on television, dramas on television. But actually the story and drama of Bill Bratton's achievements is just as exciting, or more so, than what you might see on these programs. And he is unique, I think, in having been the Commissioner of the New York Police Department and the Chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. So from coast to coast, his experience has been remarkable and uniquely successful. He's going to speak to us, but before he does, could you please welcome the Policing Minister, Nick Herbert, who will introduce him to us.
Thank you very much indeed, Charles. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a huge pleasure to be here and to see so many senior police officers present. I'm often told that I must feel very reassured constantly to be surrounded by so many police officers and therefore to feel so safe. But I have to reply that as was pointed out to me by a friend who texted me on the day it happened, that the president of Ecuador had to be rescued from his own police service by the intervention of the army after he initiated a reform of pay and conditions, and yet begun to recruit my Republican guard. But should it be necessary, I may be asking for volunteers. I say that with Paul McKeever present. It's a particular pleasure to be able to introduce Bill Bratton this evening. He has fulfilled this, as Charles mentioned, unique position of being the head both of the New York City Police as Commissioner from 94 to 96, and then as head of the LAPD as well between 2002 and 2009. I note, therefore, serving under mayors of different political persuasions. And I think we all look forward immensely to the insights that this will give us. But one of the things that is so clear is that there was a great difference in resource that was available to Bill in LA with a much smaller police force than was available to him in New York. The triumph of policing in New York, which delivered huge falls in crime during his tenure, falls that academic research has pointed out considerably exceeded the international falls in crime and the national fall that was experienced in the United States at the time, was then replicated when Bill took over in LA. Thereby proving that in this case lightning does strike twice, and also proving that the reforms were very much driven by the man. I think it's important to say that the United States and the United Kingdom are different countries with slightly different cultures and different styles of policing. It's important for us to understand those differences. But we can, of course, learn internationally from where things have gone right. As I'm sure, as Bill would be the first to say, the United States can learn from the great successes in UK policing. And it seems to me that both models draw, in essence, on the style of policing that was set by Sir Robert Peel when he founded the first Metropolitan Police Force and talked about the basic mission of the police as being to prevent crime and disorder. Here we're told that very often that 43 police forces in England and Wales is too many. In the United States there are 17,000 police departments. And Bill is not the only commissioner who has delivered big reductions in crime against a background of tight resources, something that is being shared at the moment between both countries, with US departments facing budgetary situations as well. In our own country, Sir Hugh Ward in Northern Ireland delivered reductions in crime against the background of a smaller police force too. So we should remember our domestic successes as well. Nevertheless, the triumph of accountability and what that helped to deliver, ideas such as street-level crime mapping, were all things which I and others, and I'm sure also Policy Exchange, saw when they went over to the United States and visited Bill and others. Specifically, street-level crime mapping was something I saw when I visited him in LA, and the coalition government is committed to introducing that in January next year. Today we've given notice of the introduction of our police reform bill, which will replace police authorities with directly elected police and crime commissions. So we can learn from where things are done well, both here and abroad. But above all, we can certainly celebrate the career and learn from indisputably one of the world's great crime fighters, somebody who is celebrated not just in his own country, but also here in the United Kingdom. And that's why it is a special pleasure to be able to welcome Bill Bratton, CBE, this evening. Thank you.
Introduction. And thank you on behalf of my wife Ricky, who is here with me, for the opportunity to once again visit your wonderful country in this great city. Thank you certainly to the Policy Exchange for allowing me to continue to contribute thoughts and ideas to the ongoing debate about the importance of policing and what works and what doesn't. And also the opportunity to once again return to England to see if I can continue in my quest to perfect my English. And I'm oftentimes accused in the United States with my Bostonian accent of never having acquired the language, so it's coming over here helps me to reinforce that I am hopefully acquiring it slowly but surely. Tonight I want to share some of that language with you, and I've been asked to share the American experience through my eyes and through my experiences. And to do that briefly so that we might have time to have questions and answers that might hopefully further inform you if my remarks are not able to do that. Chinese have an expression that I have continually embraced, and it's an expression that is well known to you, that may you live in interesting times. Well, for 40 years of my life, I have had the phenomenal opportunity to live in always interesting times. Because policing is always of interest, both to those of us in the profession and certainly of importance to all of you who are impacted by the profession. And over these past 40 years, I have seen around the world, but most specifically in my country, and almost as specifically in your country, because I've had the opportunity to watch and learn many of the experiences that you have gone through over these same 40 years, that cops count, police matter. I am a strong advocate of the importance of police. 40 years in the business has not dissuaded me from that importance and the reaffirmation that I made the right decision in 1970 to become a Boston police officer at the age of 23. As each and every day of these past 40 years, I have had the opportunity to not only enhance my sense of value of my contribution to the society that I work with, but that each and every day I had the opportunity to have profound impact on the lives of so many people. Whether in the 90s, the 8 million people living in New York City, or more recently, the last 7 years, 4 million people living in Los Angeles. Decisions made by me, my leadership team, decisions by officers on patrol in the neighborhoods, every decision we make had the potential to improve their lives or possibly detract from the quality of their lives. So I am a profound advocate of my profession and its importance in our democratic society. In our democracies, either our constitutional democracy or yours, the obligation of government, the first and primary obligation, is to ensure public safety, the public order. And to that end, police ultimately were created. The modern police conception was conceived here, Sir Robert Peel, 1829. And in an early meeting with Paul Stevenson, and we had a discussion about that first year. I will not share that with you because he asked me not to. Recollections of the Metropolitan Police in 1829 when they first took the beats in the city. But it strikes me when I review the 9 principles of policing promulgated by Sir Robert Peel over 100 some odd years ago, not too far from this spot, that the expression "everything old is new again." We have truly returned to the phenomenal wisdom of that gentleman when he began to advocate for the importance of police in the city of London and in the country of England. The understanding that the importance of police in delivering public safety, all the other benefits and fruits of society emanate from that first fundamental obligation, whether it be education, healthcare, social reform, all of it is more impactful and more beneficial if it is delivered in a safe society. So in terms of the subject of my discussion this evening, cops count, police matter, it is formed on that foundation, that basis. In the United States, that we have, over the last 40 years, been engaged in a series of revolutions, evolutions, paradigms. One of the great things about the profession of policing, it's always changing. If you don't like it today, just wait till tomorrow because it's going to be different. And certainly in your country in the next week to a month, it's going to be very different. And I'm so pleased to have had this opportunity these 2 days to come here and get very close to what is being proposed and what is going to be promulgated and what will effectively take place very shortly. Because it is nothing short of a revolution in the way you intend to police your country. But what is the intention of that change? It's the intention of every change in policing to try to find a better way to deliver that first obligation of government, public safety. I think, looking at my experience in my country, that we have come so far and have established a phenomenal foundation upon which to build further going forward. Going forward in times of plenty or in times of shortage of resources. And both our countries right now are certainly facing, over the next several years, shortage of resources, not only for public safety, but for so many other things. But if we get it right, continue to get it right in America, and as you engage in your new experiment and get it right here, if we provide that foundation of public safety, all the other benefits of society will flourish. A stronger economy, more money is available for health care and schools, more money for more police, more technology. It all begins, from my perspective, with policing. My country has gone through phenomenal changes in how we look at our police and what we expect of them. In the 1970s, we went through the first revolution that I was part of as a young police officer, being acted upon by that revolution. It was the desire of my country to professionalize its police services, a profession that had seemingly lost its way in the 50s and 60s, in which our minority citizens, our African Americans in particular, felt abused and brutalized by that profession. A society in which many of our college-educated young people during their college years felt disaffected from society and focused a lot of their anger on the police who were basically interfering with that expression of liberty that they were so desirous of exhibiting. We were also engaged in a very unpopular war during that period of time. So coming out of the societal upheaval of the 60s, American police were told, you must change, even as America tries to change how it deals with its seemingly intractable issues of racism, poverty, social injustice. And that change was called the professional era of policing. And I grew up my first 10 to 15 years in that era. And it emphasized that police would improve our response to crime. And it's a critical word, response, to understand the direction of policing in the United States in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Because it dictated how we were evaluated, how we focused our resources, and where our leadership of the time took us. The idea was that we were to measure our success on our response to crime, response to 911 calls. How many arrests did we make? How many clearances did we make? The belief was that police could not prevent crime. That was not their responsibility, obligation, or capability. There was an adage that I have embraced for so many years that exemplifies that type of expectation. You can expect what you inspect. In the United States in the 70s and 80s, we were inspected, the police, based on our response to crime. As a young police sergeant in the Boston Police Department, I designed many of the early response measurement systems of the Boston Police Department. The standard B plan, which basically measured how long did we take at roll call, how much time did we spend out of service. And out of service, interestingly enough, was when we were technically in service. Because out of service meant we were out of the vehicle servicing the public. So even the way we thought about our time spent dealing with the public was in a way in which we weren't in service when we were roaming around, waiting for the next call to respond to, and we were out of service when we were actually out servicing the public. we excuse the expression, we got an ass backwards. And for much of those 2 decades, we continued to, in some respects, be measured by our response to crime, and we were excused from doing anything about its prevention. And what happened over that period of time is increasingly American police chiefs focused on dealing and responding with major crime. As numbers were reduced, most American police departments suffered a decline in numbers in the 70s and 80s during tough budgetary times. New York City Police Department, which until recently had 38,000 officers during that period of time, went down to, I think it was 17,000 in the 1970s. An incredibly small number for an incredibly complex city. But with the pressures of reduced resources, the focus of police was on expectation of society and government. And the expectation of society and government was, you couldn't prevent crime, so focus on the response to it. Improve your professional capabilities, forensics, improve your training, improve your education level, improve the quality of police officers. And we would hope that there would be some beneficial residual effect on crime rates as police became more professional. But what began to happen was that we began to grow more distant from our communities. With fewer police officers, with much more emphasis on chasing 911 calls, with much more emphasis on solving crime, we neglected totally in the 60s, 70s, and 80s what you describe as antisocial behavior, which we describe as quality of life crimes, or as George Kelly and Jim Wilson speak about in their excellent Atlantic Monthly article, Broken Windows, that our policing focus was on serious crime, on response to crime, but we lost sight of the importance of what people saw every day in their lives, in their neighborhoods, on their transit systems on their way to work, and in their work environments. And New York was probably the poster city for all that went wrong in America during that time. You've all seen the films, you've all seen the films of the movies from the 60s and 70s and 80s where every subway car was totally covered with graffiti. Those of you who visited New York saw the evidence of it in the sense of the disorder on the streets, the aggressive beggars, the homeless population, the encampments, the graffiti everywhere in every public building. A city that in many respects looked like some type of Fellini movie, if you will, or Mad Max movie, but that was the reality. And even while police were focusing without success on reducing serious crime, the public was being overwhelmed by these societal crimes in which they saw their neighborhoods deteriorating and police response inadequate at best, or not at all the norm in most instances. So by 1990, we were a country that was in great disarray, to the extent that many of our leading politicians actually had begun to express not optimism about being able to do something about the problem, but maybe the idea that this is as good as it gets. And I use that phrase, as good as it gets, because it was a term used by the then governor of New York State, Mario Cuomo, in 1989, an individual thought to be a leading candidate for the presidency of the United States. When asked about the crime situation in New York State and New York City specifically, that was his comment. Maybe this is as good as it gets. When leadership expressed that lack of optimism, it did not bode well for society or its concerns. Unfortunately, in America, in the early 1990s, late 1980s, a new form of policing, a new philosophy, a new style of policing was embraced, led in large part by American police chiefs, academics, some politicians, Bill Clinton, President, Rudy Giuliani, Mayor of New York. The idea that political leadership, police leadership, community activists believed that something must be done, but more importantly, something could be done. But to achieve it, we were going to have to, in effect, change the way we policed our communities. And the community policing phenomenon, which in the 70s and 80s I was acted upon as a police officer by the professional model policing. In the 90s, then as a police chief, police commissioner in Boston, police chief of transit in New York, and then subsequently police commissioner in New York City, I became one of the leaders in the police profession of advocating the community police model. And the strength of the community police model was several. Partnership. Police made it quite clear we could not do it alone, that we needed to partner up with the rest of government, the system of government, with the judiciary, with the prosecutor, with even the defense attorney, those that represented those we arrested, with communities, where communities would prioritize for us what was it that they wanted us, the police, to focus on. In the 70s and 80s, we thought we knew it all, and with our limited resources, the focus was on serious crime. We missed the boat, if you will, in understanding that so many communities, what was creating fear in their lives was the societal disorder that they encountered every day. Because even in the worst crime year in the history of New York City, 1990, 700,000 reported, documented serious crime. 1 out of 10 New Yorkers were afflicted by that crime personally. But every day, all 8 million New Yorkers were afflicted by the quality of life offenses that they were seeing that were destroying their neighborhoods, their transit system, and indeed destroying the business part, Manhattan, of that city. And we had failed to recognize that. We had failed to recognize the need to address simultaneously serious crime, but also quality of life crime. We had failed to appreciate that by addressing quality of life crime, we were preventing the growth of additional serious crime, but also we were seen much more frequently by the public addressing that quality of life crime than making the arrests for the serious crime. So it's not so much about how many police we had, it's how we were using them. New York City had hired 7,000 additional police in 1991 and 92 in response to the public demand to do something about the serious crime rate. Their tax dollars were increased for that specific purpose. But in 1993, Rudy Giuliani won the election against the mayor who had fought the battle to hire those 7,000 officers, largely on the fact that they were not using those officers in an appropriate fashion. And when I say appropriate, in a fashion in which the public felt and could see for themselves that something was being done with the investment that they had made in the New York City Police Department. Because those 7,000 officers, average age 21, 22, 6 months of schooling, had been assigned equally to the city's 75 precincts, approximately 100 officers to each precinct. But the precinct commander had no authority to assign them other than to very specific beats in that precinct on very specific hours to very specific responsibilities. And what ultimately had happened over a period of 18 months, the officers were spending about 60% of the time, something that you can relate to here in Britain, filling out paperwork about who they had talked to, what are the problems in the neighborhood, what am I doing about those problems. There is no 21-year-old, 6-month probationary police officer that can do anything about any problem in the city of New York. We have police commissioners who can't do anything about any problems. And that was one of the failed aspects of it, that we had located the power at the wrong location, at the bottom rung of the ladder. And the public was not seeing their concerns being addressed because those cops were not out there dealing with the quality of life that 7,000 very visible officers could deal with, very visibly, freeing up other more seasoned officers to deal much more focused on the serious crime. The secret of policing in the United States was the duality of focus. Not how many cops you have, but how you use them. And in using them, you had to focus on all of the issues that were creating fear and disorder. And we had neglected for over 20 years, 2 decades, the issues of quality of life or antisocial behavior in the United States. In New York City, and then subsequently in LA, the distinctive difference between the two most significant experiences that I am known for, the principal difference between those two cities was the amount of resources I had to work with. 38,000 cops in New York, 9,000 in LA, 8 million residents, 300 square miles in New York, 4 million residents, 500 square miles in LA. To see a police officer in Los Angeles was a rare experience because we had one police car on average for every 3 square miles on duty at any given time. My wife Ricky and I, when we first moved there, when she would spot a police car, she would say, "Oh, look, Bill, a sighting." The rarity of seeing black and white in Los Angeles versus in New York. In the early 90s, you could see police everywhere. But the difference was in LA, when you saw them, when you had that sighting, they were doing something. They were usually out of the car on a traffic stop. They had somebody up against the wall. They were seen as engaged, but there were not enough of them. In New York, they were everywhere, but they were not engaged. They were standing around, they were walking around, they were talking with each other. That Paul Stevenson in the conversation today was very pleased that with my keen, perceptive eye for policing, yesterday as my wife and I were walking around up toward Piccadilly, in the course of our walk along the shopping malls, I saw 3 different constables on patrol. And what I noticed was they were on patrol by themselves. In my experience over 15 years that I've been coming to London, is you never saw a lobby by himself or herself. They were always in pairs. They seldom match sets. And similarly in New York for years, we had this issue because of the concerns of danger, et cetera, that the officers had to be partnered up all the time. And so Paul, coincidentally this morning in our discussion in his office, talked about some of the changes in terms of force multiplication and trying to get more out of the existing resources, is assigning the officers, increasing numbers to single officer patrol. And all the studies that have been done in the United States reinforce that, interestingly enough, officers are much more perceptive and much more attentive to their surroundings when they're by themselves than when they're walking or in a car because they spend most of their time talking. So even yesterday, the idea of seeing those constables on patrol, what were they doing? They weren't talking to their partner, they were looking. And when I said hello to them, they acknowledged my hello. When I was commissioner in New York City shortly after my appointment, I was walking my dog in front of my apartment building, and the precinct commander was keen enough to assign a couple of walking officers in the neighborhood to make sure I wasn't mugged from I was out walking the dog in that high crime neighborhood at that time. And I can remember walking down this long, long block, walking my dog, and here's these 2 officers coming toward me. I'm feeling pretty good. Officers on patrol. And we get closer, and we get closer. And never once did they look at me. And even when I said, "Good evening, officers," I got a begrudging "good evening," and they never looked at me. So these 2 officers walking in front of the police commissioner's house never noticed that the police commissioner was walking. So it's the idea of, it's not so much how many police you have. It's great to have a lot, but it's what you do with them. So my experience, LA, 9,000 officers, New York, 38,000 officers. LA with actually a more significant crime problem because it was so gang influenced in Los Angeles, and the area was so huge. It was the focus of how we used the police that was so critically important. And that focus of how we used the police really came to the idea of how we led and managed the police. And let me speak to that because I think it has some relevance to the current situation that you are now engaged in terms of rethinking how you direct your police services. It's been referenced that the model that you're looking at is an American model, the idea of a chief constable reporting to an elected official. We have no model in America. We have such a hodgepodge of different ways of doing things. In New York City as police commissioner, I reported directly to the mayor. But as a civilian commissioner, I had total responsibility for policy, operations, discipline, hiring. It was all under my control. In Los Angeles, as police chief, I reported to a 5-member appointed board of police commissioners appointed by the mayor. They had a separate inspector general. I was responsible for the operations of the department, but policy was the responsibility of the police commission. So my most 2 significant police experiences were totally different administrative experiences in terms of what was expected of me. So your model that you're looking at, the 43 police services, it's more of a generic model in that you're talking about a single person interacting, an elected official interacting exclusively with the chief constable. And as to how that works out over time is part of the effort that you're engaged in. But I speak to that because the American experience in terms of as a police leader, that you are always responsive to an elected official, mayor, town manager, city council person. And the responsiveness to that leadership is about the idea of how do you best use your resources. And the changes in the 90s and the 21st century in policing was the idea of decentralization. In both organizations that I worked for and had the privilege of leading, and I thank you for your opening comment in terms of the comments about the leadership and leading the reform movement. I was also supported by a whole group of individuals, great leaders who worked with me, who had a shared vision, and how to basically effectuate change in American police services. What we designed was basically the push down of authority, accountability, and responsibility to an appropriate level where that dual issue of dealing with serious crime and antisocial behavior and quality of life could be adequately met. And in the 75 precincts of New York City Police Department, the 21 area Los Angeles Police Department, that location was the precinct captain or the area captain, who on average had 300 to 400 officers assigned to them. What we did was to give away a lot of the power, the central control that the police commissioner had, the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department had. The only thing I wanted from them was the vision was, in Los Angeles as in New York, reduce crime, reduce fear and disorder, post 9/11, keep the city safe from terrorism. But those were the goals. It was that simple. That was the vision. I surrounded myself with leaders, and I had great discretion, fortunately, in both organizations, where I could effectively select the key leaders that were going to work with me. And together we developed the goals that were going to be the goals for the department. And they were the simple goals: reduce crime, fear, and disorder. And then we pushed farther down into the organization the development of strategies to address what were the identified issues that were creating fear. In New York City in 1994, there were 8 of them: drugs, guns, youth violence, stolen automobiles, police corruption. There were 8 issues that were creating not only serious crime in combination or on their own, but were also the linchpin strategy was quality of life. Because every day, every New Yorker was experiencing that. But they were not experiencing the same thing. Manhattan was experiencing, in certain neighborhoods, a different form of fear than East New York. where the precinct I live in Manhattan, there were no murders in 1994. But in the 75 precinct in East New York, there were 150. And when you went to those two different neighborhoods, those were two very different neighborhoods in terms of the quality of life. The graffiti, the abandoned cars, the street scene. Yet we were trying to police with one overriding monolithic set of policing strategies. We changed that. We allowed the precinct commander to develop strategies, tactics to address their particular issues. They were allowed to decide how many officers in uniform, how many officers in plain clothes. They were allowed for the first time to get drug warrants. They were allowed for the first time to engage in a lot of anti-crime activities, things that in the 70s and 80s, many American police departments, particularly New York, had moved away from because of fear of corruption. The NYPD had become a very risk-averse organization, and one of the reasons why it did not deal with a lot of the street-level antisocial behavior or street-level crime, drug dealing on the corner, prostitution, a lot of the issues that people saw every day and called 911 about, but police would not respond, or if they did, they didn't respond adequately, was the fear of corruption. Effectively, what they created was a sense the cops must be corrupt because they don't do anything about this problem. It's there year after year, and I call and nothing is done. So in the effort to not risk officers farther down the food chain being corrupt, headquarters held such a tight leash that to deal with drugs in New York City that were overflowing in every precinct, out of a 35,000 person police department at that time, only 1,000 officers were committed to dealing with drugs at the headquarters level. Precincts could not deal with drugs. Uniformed officers could not make drug arrests, they were discouraged. The specialized units were working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, bankers hours. It was great to be on the bank squad, it was great to be on the shopping squad, it was great to be on the stolen car squad, because you had every weekend off. Meanwhile, the criminals were basically working 7 days a week, 24 days, up to 365 days a year. So, in summary, what had happened was you can expect what you inspect. The NYPD was inspecting to ensure its officers stayed out of trouble, and they stayed out of trouble. The corruption issues went down in the 70s and 80s. But in the system that was put in place to stay out of trouble, they had become risk averse. And the quality of life got out of hand, and crime got out of hand, because basically they weren't addressing it all the time. So in the 90s, with that growth in the department, we authorized precinct commanders to basically effectively be miniature police chiefs. You decide. We will tell you what you should be putting out to address your 911 call workload. But you can have the ultimate decision about how you staff your precinct, how many officers here, how many officers there. However, I wasn't born yesterday. I love cops, I trust them, but they can get in trouble faster than any human being. Then you have to hold them accountable. That's the reality. You have to hold them accountable. So the accountability system we put in place was CompStat. The idea that the focus I wanted was on crime, the focus I wanted was on quality of life. How are we going to measure that in the freedom that we were giving our precinct commanders, they were responding to those overriding issues, but addressing the particular issues in their respective precincts? And it was the CompStat system, where twice a week they would come in, half a dozen precincts at a time, and report on what they were doing about crime and disorder. The CompStat system has 4 basic elements: timely, accurate intelligence, crime mapping. Put the crime dots on the map as you receive them. Very quickly you start spotting hotspots and clusters. And what do you then do? Cops on the dots. I might have had limited numbers of cops in Los Angeles, large numbers of cops in New York, but in identifying where they should be, I maximize their effectiveness by spotting a pattern, a trend after the second or third event, rather than 2-3 months down the line. Because the dirty secret of American policing was we were not using crime numbers to direct the assignment of our resources. Why? Because we were responding to 911 calls, we were investigating crimes after the fact, we were not focused on the prevention of crime. And the prevention of crime can be greatly assisted by spotting patterns and trends after the second or third event. So the American model focused in the 90s, and many other cities in America were doing the same thing, not just me in New York. To be not receive most of the attention as London would in our country. And this experiment worked. Cops on the dots, accountability, decentralization, inclusion. Inclusion meaning letting the public, letting the rest of the criminal justice system work with you, and transparency. The idea of talking openly about the crime numbers, reporting them on our websites, reporting them on our crime maps, so that the public actually had as much access. In Los Angeles today, the public and the LA Times have the same access to the crime maps that the police commanders do. They're all sharing the same information. Inclusion, decentralization, transparency. You can expect what you inspect. And what we were inspecting was reduction in crime, addressing quality of life issues. And I'm a great believer in that philosophy, in that it worked in New York with a lot of resources, and it worked in LA, many fewer resources. And indeed, I left a year ago Los Angeles, my successor, who grew up in that system over those last 7 years, over the past year has had to deal with a significant reduction in the resources he's had to work with. While we grew the size of the Los Angeles Police Department by 10%, up to almost 10,000 officers, this past year, dealing with the economic recession that you're dealing with here, we had to reduce, he had to eliminate overtime. In exchange for at least doing away with the overtime, officers get compensatory time off, meaning that they have to take a day off instead of being paid overtime, in which they then would have worked the day and gotten overtime for that extra day. In reality, the new chief of police in Los Angeles is policing the city today with fewer officers available to him each day than I had in 2002. The one benefit he has is there's 50% less crime to deal with, but the reality is he has diminished resources. But what he does not have diminished is the system that allowed that crime to be reduced in the first place. In the city of Los Angeles, over the last 7 years, 8 years now, one of the other benefits of the assertive policing, the focused policing, the transparent policing, has been improved public confidence. In a city where for 40 years the African American population was literally at war with the police department that was abusing it through most of those 40 years, the turnaround in race relations during the same period of time, as crime has been reduced, as quality of life has improved, has resulted in the most recent survey by the LA Times, and a Harvard study was commissioned around the same time. Is 2/3 of African Americans and Latinos in Los Angeles now rate the Los Angeles Police Department is doing a good to very good job. So there was the ability to reduce crime, deal with individual neighborhood issues, improve the quality of life, and at the same time, because the police were seen as responsive to the individual issues in their neighborhoods, whether it was the white neighborhood, black neighborhood, or Latino neighborhood, the overall impression and levels of satisfaction of the Los Angeles Police Department increased. And during this past year of declining resources, has stayed the same. So in summary, and opening it up to whatever questions you might have, and its relevance to what you're engaged in at the moment, that cops count, police matter. You can expect what you inspect. In your country, as I've visited here for the last 15 years, one of the constant complaints that I always received from the chief constables and others was the control of the Home Office over so much of what they did through the budgetary process. The idea that you had to do certain things to receive this money, you had to hire this certain category to get funds. The idea that the ability to respond to local issues was diminished by the control at the national level. And that is the distinct difference between your country and mine, because we have always been decentralized. With those 17,000 police agencies, none of them respond to a national mandate other than to police constitutional. We might all vie competitively to get federal dollars for certain initiatives, but the national government is not dictating how we police other than we police constitutionally. So the system that you appear to be moving toward, its similarity to American policing is in that regard, in that there's an effort to decentralize, if you will, and empower at a much lower level. And instead of, if I understand it correctly, chief constables looking to the national government, they'll now have to have the opportunity to work much more closely with their individual communities and respond to those communities' interests and desires. It's, I'll close the way I began. We live in interesting times, and you are certainly about to enter very interesting times. And I wish you well, and I hope to get back from time to time to stay abreast of how those issues go forward.
Thank you very much for a fascinating speech. Now we're going to throw it open to everybody. The only rule, of course, is that you should say who you are and where you come from.
Lady there, please. Yeah.
There is a mic. Is there a microphone there? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. There it comes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Well, it's wonderful to meet you.
Sorry, name and.
Oh, sorry. My name is Jessica.
Name and serial number.
My name is Jessica DeGrazia. I'm actually a former prosecutor from New York City. I've lived in the United Kingdom for a number of years now. I've worked with some of your current colleagues. I was a prosecutor during the high crime era. I worked in Harlem. Everything you say is exactly right. You've helped to turn around New York City. I'm very grateful for that. I'd like to talk about the system that is being proposed. The shedding of bureaucracy here is absolutely critical. You talked about the decentralization of both the creation of policy and its implementation. It is one of the strengths of the American system, and I hope that it will now take place here. I'd like to ask you a question, however, about the elected police commissioner system that's being proposed. One of the features of the myriad systems that exist in the United States is checks and balances. And one of the critiques of the proposed system here is an absence of check and balance on the power of the elected police commissioner. Now, I know that in Los Angeles you've had the mayor, you've had a city council, you've had a board of police commissioners, and you actually also had a federal judge.
And the LA Times.
Yeah, and the LA Times, okay? And no, not the same libel laws either. Do you think these checks and balances impacted on you positively or negatively in terms of your ability to deliver the reforms that you wanted to deliver?
They certainly did, but I'll point out that those were also in a constant state of evolution. Los Angeles, over the last 20 years, beginning with the Rodney King incident, the riots, creation of the Christopher Commission, there was an evolution, which continues to this day, in how a police chief reported to the police commission, his independence from the police commission. Prior to Rodney King, police chiefs in Los Angeles had lifetime tenure, and that gave them phenomenal independence, and it also gave them the Rodney King riots. That for a year prior to the Rodney King incident and the riot, the mayor and the police chief never had a conversation because they couldn't stand each other. And so the issue you're facing, once again, in terms of the idea that somehow it's based on the American model, the American model has its positives and it has its negatives, and there are no two models that are alike among those 17,000, many similarities. If I understand it correctly, that the structure of this police commissioner position is still being formulated and it's going to be announced shortly, I guess, Mr. Herbert, if I understand it. And there's been, certainly I've seen a number of white papers and other documents that give and take and recommendations about how it should work. And so I can't speak from any informed basis because it really hasn't been finalized, to the best of my knowledge, in the sense of what it's actually going to look like. I was told today, though, in an earlier session of the discussion, that some of the thinking about that position, one of the things I emphasized was the partnership across the justice community. And in your new government, Mr. Herbert now, in his portfolio, has not only police, but the other components of the criminal justice community with the effort to try and coordinate between those agencies, because if they're operating independently of each other, everybody's doing this all the time. The success in New York and LA was the partnerships that we formed within the criminal justice community, where one entity was trying not to overwhelm the other. because I could get good press because I was locking everybody up in creation. You cannot arrest your way out of any of these problems if the prosecutor doesn't have the resources to prosecute the evidence, if the judge doesn't have the ability to convict the juries, and if there's no place to put them. There needs to be that coordination, if you will, and if I understand what's going on in your government, there's a recognition of the need to coordinate. My understanding also is the contemplation is that potentially over time, these police commissioners may have a similar role to try and coordinate in their local communities, not just the police, but throughout the criminal justice system. So that while the early on attention, and I think the public understanding is that it's the police commissioner and chief constable, the evolution goal, if I understand it correctly, is to spread it more broadly. Mr. Herbert could probably describe it better than I, certainly, that he's one of the principal architects, and hopefully they're not riding you on a rail out of town a year from now, but sounds like there's a lot of good things in the proposals going forward.
Alex Dean, Big Brother Watch, and louder than I was expecting. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. There's another reform that this government's proposing I'd like your view on. The Freedom Bill is to be with us in the United Kingdom in February or so next year. And one thing that is going to be in it, we're told, is regulation of closed-circuit television, surveillance cameras. I wonder, broadly speaking, if you had an opportunity to advise our government on it, what your advice would be.
Actually, let me tell you the position I take in the United States, which has a growing CCTV industry and use of those cameras, nowhere near what you have in your country, and by all accounts in your country, in this city, more so than the rest of the world. They can be of great value to the police, and certainly it's time after time after time where evidence gathered by them at the scene of the crime has in fact helped. In many respects, it's ultimately up to you, the public, to determine their value. That, you know, is it by prevention alone, that even if they're not working, that because you see a camera that you're deterred from committing a crime? Does it aid the police when in fact something is recorded? Watching one of your TV shows yesterday, you evidently have a capability over here to basically sign up and basically watch your local Piggly Wiggly store, just watch the aisles of the store. To basically, if you've got nothing better to do on a Sunday night, just watch people shopping. That it's like really. I hope you have more to do than that. But that's kind of an extension of how it's going. From my perspective, I think CCTVs are a good thing. As to how much of a good thing they are, that ultimately you'll have to make your own decision in your own country. And as you make decisions, the rest of the world will watch, because you are probably the most closely watched community in the world at this junction. And maybe that does in fact contribute to, I know you have concerns about high crime rates, etc., but you still have extraordinarily low crime rates compared to most other parts of the world, including most democracies. And I think a lot of that is mitigated against negatively because of the concerns about the quality of life issue of the antisocial behavior. The sense that a lot of what is creating fear does not seem to be currently addressed by your police services. And if I understand some of the decentralization, it is to allow local communities, local chief constables, and the elected official to make a determination how should police be focused rather than relying on the Home Office to identify the priorities. So even the camera issue is one of those that, you know, really up to the local communities in terms of what they want to tolerate or how much they want to use them.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Paul Osborne. I'm a local councillor and elected official in the Borough of Harrow. My question is, you mentioned in your speech, and it comes out much clearer in your book, the amount of flexibility you had in picking your leadership team. I wonder if you could say a bit about how much flexibility you had, how you used that, you know, both in terms of promoting people, moving people out, bringing new people in. How important do you think that was in the various turnarounds that you managed to do in various police departments? So I'm not sure it's part of some of the recommendations that we're putting forward here.
The reality is that many police chiefs don't have that discretion. In some departments, the unionization goes on up to the person right under the chief of police. In my case, in New York City, my first year in New York, I had total discretion of who to select, who to promote, who to appoint. My second year working with Mr. Giuliani, I lost a lot of that discretion as politically he sought to be more involved in that process. It was one of the reasons why he forced me out and I left. We were really, had a lot of contretemps about who should be selected for what position. In Los Angeles, I had the luxury in one of the most overseen police departments in America. In fact, it was the most overseen police department in America. I had a federal consent decree with a monitoring team that was costing us $13 million a year. I had the Los Angeles Times that had at one time 8 full-time people just always looking at us. I had the police commission. I had the inspector general who worked for the police commission. And I had 15 city council members, each of whom thought they were the mayor of their respective area. So that was the oversight that I had, but I also had the most power of any position I've ever held in policing. In that, I had total ability to select my leadership team from the position of captain and above. I could assign them, I could move them around. The Jim Collins book puts it great. Get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. In both Los Angeles and New York, when I went in, I got rid of a lot of people off the bus because they didn't have the same vision that we can make the city safe. They didn't have the same vision as to how to make it safe. So I don't denigrate at all that I had great early on power in New York and continuing power in LA. One of the great things from my perspective of LA right now, the 100 people in the department, captain and above, were all either selected by me and assigned by me or promoted by me over the last 7 years. 45% of the police officers in the Los Angeles Police Department were hired during my time as chief of police. So they've never known anything but the Bratton Villaraigosa, Mayor Villaraigosa being the mayor, who was so supportive of the police. There's no denying when you get the ability to pick your own personnel and place them and move them. Any of your chief constables would give their right arms if they had that total freedom. And then to be held accountable for that. I rose or fall on the quality of the people I selected. And I was very fortunate that I had a great cadre of people to select from. And on very few instances did they let me or the public down. That they performed phenomenally, as reflected in New York and in Los Angeles in the sense of they embraced the vision. The Gandhi quote I used, to create the change, it must become the change. They believed in the change. And when you believe in something, it makes it happen that much more quickly. I think the challenge for your government, and some of whom are here, is going to be to get the chief constables, to get the police commission, to get the public to believe that this change that is being promulgated needs to be given a chance, needs to basically see if its intended benefits are in fact achieved in the way intended. That was the luxury I certainly had in New York in the first year, and in LA throughout the whole 7 years. In 7 years in that very political city, I never received a single call from anybody about a promotion, about a reassignment, about a disciplinary case. Just the way it was. The police chief had total independence, but I would be evaluated by the police commission every year on my disciplinary decisions. I would be evaluated, my performance evaluation on people that I had selected. And I served at the discretion, while I had a 5-year term, I served at the discretion of the police commission. And they could remove me for cause or a series of causes. And so that I was not independent of that civilian control.
Neil O'Brien, please, at the front, and then after that, the gentleman right at the back there.
Neil O'Brien, I'm Director of Policy Exchange. One of the things we've been thinking about here is about gang violence, both in terms of the legislation in the UK, where some of the local authorities have been doing very interesting, innovative things, and also about policing, anti-gang policing. And I wondered if there's anything you would say about your experience of that, particularly in LA.
I'll speak to that with the caveat that I really don't have a full appreciation of the laws that your police are able to work with versus what I was able to work with, the tools I had in Los Angeles were actually different than the tools I had to work with in New York City, the laws that I had to use. In Los Angeles, the gang problem was so pervasive that in the late 1980s, the city city had its own attorney who dealt with misdemeanor crime and with civil issues, created what was called a gang injunction. Its intended use was the use of civil law to empower the police to focus on gang activity. We, the police, had to develop a huge amount of evidence that we would then take to a judge with the city attorney identifying these gang members and the activity they had been engaged in over time, and how that activity in this geographic area was creating fear, disorder, and crime. The judge, upon hearing that evidence, then enjoined, through the injunction, those identified gang members from doing certain things, from being in certain areas at certain times, from being seen together, from carrying cell phones. I mean, literally, the more specific we could be about the antisocial behavior and criminal behavior they're engaged in, using civil law, we were able to enjoin that behavior, even to the extent of prohibiting them from carrying a cell phone in that geographic area. By the time I left Los Angeles, I think almost a third of the city, 480 square mile city, was covered by gang injunctions that were specific to that area, so that the gang officers in particular working that area had this phenomenal tool that they could use against the gang member. If they saw that gang member within 500 feet of a park, for example, they were authorized to stop him because he had been barred from being within 500 feet of the park. And it was a very effective, creative tool. And my precinct or area commanders were also very creative in coming up with new ways to enhance that toll. So while it was created at the highest level, over time it was reinforced by local precinct commanders basically creating new ways to use that tool.
The man in the middle right at the back, yeah.
Hello, I'm Ben Summerskill from Stonewall. We have a situation in this country where among police officers, and indeed in the public space quite often, there's perhaps understandable resentment that an awful lot of kind of resource and effort seems to be put into engaging with minority communities in big cities such as this. And yet the flip side of that is that now 74%, 3/4 of the homosexual population in London, for example, don't report offences to the Metropolitan Police because they don't think they will be taken seriously. So we're actually in a lose-lose. So we have the resentment that this is happening, and we're not getting the policing outcomes, and that's reflected in other minority communities too. I mean, do you have any prescriptions on the basis of your experience in Los Angeles and New York about how that sort of engagement can take place in a way that isn't just politically correct kind of posturing and delivers real policing outcomes?
In fact, this is one of the experiences that coming to Britain to see what you're doing, we take things back to the United States. Several years ago, for example, in an effort to increase visibility and attention to particularly antisocial behavior, but to also expand minority representation on the Met, that there was an effort created, I think, by then Mayor Ken Livingston and Ian Blair, in which funding was specifically earmarked for the, what's the term, community service, police community service officers. And that, that, if I understand its genesis, was an effort to working with constables and sergeants to provide additional visibility and activity into many of the inner city neighborhoods of the city, but also to put people who spoke the language of that particular neighborhood, hopefully drawing recruits from that neighborhood. And that was something I had the opportunity to come over and visit and spend several days looking at, and was extraordinarily impressed with. But this again goes, I think, to one of the hearts of the heart of some of the issues that you're dealing with, in that if I understand it correctly, the numbers of those people are in fact budgeted. So I don't know if, for example, so Paul has the ability to say, well, you know, here's my budget of 50 million pounds or whatever, and I think that you know, as police commissioner here or chief constable there, I should have 3,000 police and 1,000 community service aides and 1,000 civilians. That the earmarking, the term we use in the United States when funds can only be used for a specific purpose, that I had in the United States great flexibility within my budget in terms of how to use my people and how many of each category I needed. And that was a great assistance to me, the idea that, for example, Los Angeles, 3,000 miles away from New York, and 7 years away from 9/11, is not as concerned with terrorism as New York City is. For my 7 years as police chief, I had to fight like hell to try to get resources to staff up a counterterrorism operation in the LAPD. Because I had the ability, once I was given a budget, to assign personnel as I operationally saw fit, I created a 300-person counterterrorism unit in the LAPD. While my political city council members were beating down my door that they wanted those officers in black and white so we could have a few more sightings out in the neighborhood. But through my operational understanding and information available to me from the federal government about the terrorist threat to Los Angeles, I felt it important to allocate resources in that amount based on our need at that particular time. And so the ability to have flexibility and then be held accountable for it. And that was the one thing that as a police chief, I was always willing to be held accountable for risk taking, but allow me to take risk. And rather than keep me corralled and saying, well, you have to have so many of these, you have to have so many of those, and even when your recommendation is, well, I want so many of that. And I just don't have enough intimacy with all of your systems, but I know what worked for me in the United States in the sense of the success I had in New York and LA. I had a lot of tools to work with, other tools that I took literary license with till challenged, and I'd fight them. And if I understand what the intent of the initiatives here by your new government and the Home Office now is to try to give more discretion farther down, closer to the community so there can be more timely response to the community instead of once a year the Home Office deciding, well, this year we want to focus on this priority. So by the time you focus on the priority, it's a year after the priority was identified. Rather than in my case in New York, when I identified a priority today, I could address it tomorrow because I had the flexibility to move resources around very quickly and address the priority before a year later the damn things are out of control. Hopefully that answered that question.
Can I just add a sort of postscript to that? It's often said here that certain types of crime are, in fact, the words have been coined. So homophobic meaning anti-homosexual, Islamophobic meaning the same for Muslims. And I think partly that was your question. What do you think about such categories, and do you use such categories in American policing, and do you apply them in your policing policy?
That the issues of, as our country has matured, that let's speak to the issue of gay rights. That let's face it, policing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the United States was not particularly sympathetic to those issues. But interestingly enough, in the United States, police were one of the first of society's institutions to reform itself in the way we approach that issue. And I saw that firsthand in the Boston Police Department, where the first anti-bias unit of any police department in the United States was created. I was the first liaison to the gay community in 1977 in the city of Boston. I was one of the first in the country. As we began to appreciate that we were going to have to appreciate the needs of that community, which had been in many respects abused by police in our practices. So the issue of addressing the issues of a certain segment of society, whether it's gay issues, or today in your country, my country, the concerns around Muslim citizens and the phobias, if you will, about that. There is a need for police to be attentive and aware of those issues, but sometimes we misstep in our desire to be attentive to those issues. And I can speak very specifically to an experience in Los Angeles where we were reaching out to the Muslim community, which we knew very little of, because by and large in Los Angeles, you didn't even know about them. There's 300,000 of them there, but you never heard anything about them because they weren't engaged in crime, that they were just, in some respects, in a 10 million population, they were there, but they weren't there in some respects because they were not, police attention wasn't being drawn to them. Post 9/11, police attention was drawn to the issue. So we began to reach out to that community that had not felt any need to really deal with the police, but now from a fear issue, were now wanting to dialogue with the police because they were very fearful of post 9/11 being all of them painted with the same brush. in an effort to deal with them much the same as we had dealt with the Jewish community in Los Angeles, as in New York, I knew what every Jewish institution was, whether it was a school, a synagogue, daycare center. Because of the attacks against the Jewish population, from a policing standpoint, we needed to know that so we could basically, if we got a call to that location, it was a sensitive location, and we would respond differently because of the past attacks. In a well-intended effort, we attempted to, and this is where use of terminology can jam you up, we attempted a mapping initiative of the Muslim community in Los Angeles because they weren't known to us. Many of their places of worship don't look like the big cathedrals that we see from other faiths. And we got jammed up big time with that because while we had been working with some elements of the Muslim community, other elements we had not engaged with basically saw that as an effort to develop intelligence on them from a counterterrorism standpoint, rather than a responsiveness to assist them if there were, in fact, attacks directly against them. So we were oftentimes the victims of unintended consequences in terms of our well-placed efforts to try and deal with some of the phobias that exist in society. And it is, actually, there's no more complex society in the world than right here in London, and in New York probably runs a close second because of the diversity of the populations here.
Maybe here, yes, just here. Sorry, Nick.
Thank you very much.
It's going to be ladies' night. I guess we're going right across the road here.
Hello, my name is Susan Hall. I'm a councillor in Harrow. I'm as passionate about policing as I think you are, and I have to say that we do get cops on the spot now, especially in the Mets. I'm very, very pleased with the way the Mets going.
Music to your ears.
Yes, actually, I was very cross with Paul Stevenson the other day because he had to. You may be aware we're having lots of demonstrations, and I was mortified to see Paul Stevenson on the television apologising. When the reality is, you know, our police are doing such a good job. My question to you is, how on earth do we change around the perception of policing? Because when we've got demonstrations, and I suspect we will have more coming on, sometimes thousands more appear than is expected. Almost always there's an element there of people that are purely going to cause problems. And we do something that the media call kettling, but I've been told by various police officers they don't call it kettling. I don't know, I'm not a police officer. And clearly that's for the public safety. My big question to you is, how do we turn around the perception of our police, who we should all be extremely proud of, and who we should all be behind? And it's this anti-police. The minute anything happens, there weren't enough policemen, there were too many policemen. They were, you know, they kettled them too much, they didn't do this, they didn't do that.
Let me speak to that, if I may, that you'll certainly get an experience tomorrow, I guess, to judge them once again. That you're going to have another opportunity tomorrow, I guess, for the student demonstration. But the issue of crowd management and crowd control and crowd stats going out of control is one of the most complex issues in a democratic society that any police agency anywhere in the world has to address. The predictive policing component of it, how many cops do I need for this demonstration? Do I have too many? Do I not have enough? I know when I first became police commissioner in New York City, as transit chief, I was always amazed at the thousands of police officers that New York would bring out to these demonstrations. And one of the first things I wanted to do as police commissioner was reduce the number of officers who would be assigned to parades and other events, because it just seemed to me a tremendous drain on cops being drawn into all the neighborhoods to come into Manhattan. And it didn't take me long to understand that, relying on the wisdom of New York's experience, why they did that. Because once an event starts, the ability to get officers into Manhattan with an event unfolding, you're just not going to get them. So the idea is better to be safe than sorry in terms of New York, which had a very large department and could afford to bring large numbers in. In LA, I didn't have that luxury. I had to deal with a much smaller police force. But the biggest embarrassment of my professional life, professional embarrassment for me and for the Los Angeles Police Department, was a demonstration issue 2007 when at an immigrant rights rally on May Day, 150 of my officers, our tactical unit, our metropolitan unit, basically in a cold, calculated manner, went into a 7,000 person crowd that was being significantly reported on by Latin American media. The Walter Cronkite of Latin America was in the middle of this crowd in a press tent. And we had very extensive CCTV coverage, thankfully, for that event, because we had cameras all over that park, police cameras, as well as news media cameras, many of whom were overrun by my 150 officers as they marched literally like a Roman legion from one end of that park to the other. And the black eye that created for the LAPD and for me personally as the chief was phenomenal. In that day, we had assigned almost 800 officers to what was going to be a peaceful event, and then we created, through our actions, what was a major embarrassment. I fired the chief that was in charge of that event because, in his reporting to me on the event, as I started watching on TV, he saw nothing wrong. He felt that the police had behaved appropriately, despite firing 220 projectiles, despite a large number of injuries, that he could see nothing wrong. He was from the old school. So, out of that, however, you learn from everything, and it's guaranteed that the two events that you referenced, that Sir Paul and his people have analyzed and talked about, so as they face it tomorrow, it's a continuing learning experience. And most of the time we get it right. I think in the conversation with Sir Paul this morning, he mentioned something like 4,500 events every year in London. 1,000. You never hear about most of them. Why? Because they're policed well, they're policed as you'd expect in a democracy. But every once in a while, one of the damn thing gets out of control, and you learn from that, so you try to keep the next time being a lot farther down the line. So it's the one thing we all share, no matter what country we're in, is that issue of having to deal with public demonstration. And I know in LA, some of the biggest black eyes in the LAPD have been around the bad handling of public demonstrations. And I spent a lot of my time trying to retrain, refocus the department to deal with that. But it was always that you always dreaded the next demonstration. This last May, the May 1st after the 2007 event, I sweated bullets all day long both of those days, and fortunately they went off without incident. Okay, I think the two ladies were over here to the right.
We'll have one lady, and then that really has to be the last, because I should explain, really. Yes.
Hello, my name is Baroness Newlove, and I'm also a champion for active, safer communities for this government. But I want to speak to you today as regarding antisocial behaviour. I like the way you said quality of life crimes was very impactful, and I say that because from the heart I was a victim of antisocial behaviour. My husband was murdered in 2007 in front of my 3 young daughters, and coming from a victim's perspective, while I have a lot of time for the police, I have fantastic individuals who do fantastic jobs. I just want to know how you handled victims from the first instance of a call to the end result, how you perceive in your police in America as victims, because to me they're the eyes and ears of your community, and how they're delivered when the first call, you pick up a phone call to report an incident, and how they're treated and how they're carried through to the end.
I'd like to say that we are in a evolutionary phase as it relates to the issue of dealing with victims and victimization. That we have come a long way, but have a long way to go. LAPD, for example, had a victimization unit that was intended to deal with the after-the-fact issues. NYPD had that. Some other departments have it, but most do not. There's a lot of advocacy groups that attempt to work with the police to train on the issue of victimization, how to better deal with them. Even our training, the academies has been changed. We're constantly evolving. So that I was on the streets within 12 weeks of being appointed as a police officer in Boston. Now it's a minimum of 6-7 months before officers finally go out on the street. And some of what we attempt to teach in that expanded training are some of those issues. One of the things that unfortunately oftentimes suffers in the time of budget cutbacks and other times is some of that specialized focus, training, initiative, assignment of personnel. And that once again is the idea of case, Chief Constable in the United States, the Chief of Police, has the discretion within their area to identify, with the resources available, what are the priorities that need to be addressed. So that in your particular community, with you as a strong advocate of that issue, your voice is more likely to be heard by your Chief Constable than if he's basically looking to Home Office for guidance on that issue. At least I'm speaking from the American experience in terms of as a police chief, that again, I was not looking to the national government for guidance on how to deal with local issues. When the position of the liaison to the gay community was created and I was assigned to that position, that was not something that Washington, D.C. mandated. That was something that the city of Boston, because of the horrific relationship that the Boston Police Department had with the gay community, it was leading to increasing tensions and battles, that the police commissioner at that time decided that he was going to expend scarce resources on that issue to good effect. So it would strike me that another potential benefit of the decentralization engaging in is that the ability to be more responsive to local issues, although victimization is certainly a national issue, but at certain times in certain places it's more significant than it might be in other places.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to end it there. But you think that you've been here voluntarily because you've all been enjoying it. So actually, you've been kettled. We were talking about 2 policemen walking together. We've got 3 in the front row, probably many more for all I know, but 3. Sir Dennis O'Connor, the Chief Inspector, Sir Hugh Ward of ACPO, and our very own Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Paul Stevenson. Sir Paul has to go, so that's why I had to stop you at this point, but Sir Paul is going to propose the vote of thanks to William Bratton.
Thank you, Charles, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think Charles started this fascinating session off by saying many of us think we know something about the American policing model. Well, thank the Lord we've heard an expert on the American policing model and actually debunking the fact that there is one single model. That was fascinating. And before I come to you, Bill, Minister, can I thank you for your opening as well? Because actually I think it is important to stress the very great similarities between our police services, but also stress the differences and understanding the differences. I thought you were a little bit mischievous in comparing our very proper debate about the 43 police force in this country and comparing it with the 17,000 police departments.
I think there's 17,000, maybe more.
Well, that's exactly my point. I don't think Bill would recommend the dysfunctionality of so many forces. Interestingly, one of the differences is Ray Kelly, the very illustrious Commissioner of the NYPD, is the 40th Commissioner of the NYPD, which was formed in 1901. I understand I'm the 26th Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service, which was formed in 1829. That is one heck of a difference, I think. But actually, Minister, you did properly stress that we are joined both by our similarities and a very clear understanding and analysis of our differences, because very often we do learn from each other. And that brings me to Bill, a very good friend of this country, a very good friend of policing in this country, and certainly a very good and close friend of a number of commissioners of the Metropolitan Police Service. Bill, you didn't need to mention your Boston accent, because let me assure you that you come from 6,000 miles away with your Boston accent. It is almost certainly more acceptable in London than mine, which only comes from 250 which shows something about the north-south divide. You also mentioned ask backwards. Let me tell you, it interprets. It comes across. We know ask backwards. But seriously, some of the points you make are so powerful. I'm not surprised. I've heard you before, but I'll come and listen to you again next time, because you are always worth listening to. You mentioned something in my language, talked about what is the business of policing, what is our clarity of purpose. In my language, it equates to we are in the security business. Our job is to create the conditions of security that make people enjoy their rights. And you properly mentioned the importance of appeals of 9 principles, which again is about saving life, preventing crime. There is a detection of crime and keeping the Queen's peace, that sense that we are there to protect. And certainly I've heard you before powerfully speaking about the police can make a difference. It requires leadership and focus on what we're supposed to be making a difference about. That's something that you've been passionate about for many, many years, and something that we've been listening to. Community policing model. I think you're absolutely right. And it seems to me when we study Peel's principles, you cannot implement Peel's principles unless you do adhere to and try and create a proper community policing model that recognises different citizens' needs and responds to those needs in a different way. And your address tonight, I think, has come across quite powerfully, how you've seen that make a difference where it wasn't present in the United States and where you have put it in. I'm grateful that you have referred to sort of the experience you've seen over here, how we can learn from each other. And certainly we constantly want to export and import and certainly borrow with pride, but experts around the world have done, particularly in the States. I'm also very grateful that you mentioned the power to select your own team and how important that is. That's something that I've been very powerfully saying, I hope, along with Hugh Ord and his kind of various other people for a number of years. And I'm sure the government's not for me to say what will be in the bill. You're likely to listen and given us quite that power. I'm quite hopeful. You also mentioned the importance of transparency. And you're absolutely right. I'm not going to take the opportunity, well, I'm going to take the opportunity myself. The lady who's very cross with me, I'm very used to ladies being cross with me. A wife of 3 daughters, I spent my life with ladies being very cross with me. But actually, I think there's an importance of transparency that you brought across. When we get it right, we should say we got it right. And we should stand up for our officers and say it quite clearly. But you know, sometimes when we get it wrong, we should stand up and say we got it wrong. That's about honesty and transparency, and that's something that you practiced throughout all your varied policing careers. I'm taking a very strong leadership role. For me, the one thing you didn't mention, you didn't major on, that's always been a central tenet of your whole policing model. We discussed it earlier on today, and that is the importance of the constitution of policing. Just don't break the law to enforce the law. And you did refer to that in some of the problems you faced in New York and how you brought in a very clear accountability model. And it's something, a passion that we both share. But you know, what's epitomised your career, Bill, has been that desire for accountability, that desire to devolve power, but also that very clear desire to put creativity into policing, unleash that creativity, hold people accountable, above and beyond anything else, your absolute commitment to personal leadership. You have been a great friend to policing in this country. You continue to be a great friend to policing in this country. Though I know you're in the private sector now, so you've joined the dark side at this moment in time and gone to make some oodles of money and all that sort of thing.
Hopefully.
As far as we're concerned, you continue to be a great leader in world policing. We're delighted to see you back here, and many more times may you and your wife return. Thank you very much.